Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning?
I'm doing well, thank
Good.
you.
All right.
And we're going to talk about a poll, and you're the poll expert.
Only when it goes our way.
Yeah. No, polling is interesting, and it's good at least for 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I'm always amazed about polling, and since you're the expert for our staff, it's amazing that they can do this. How do they sort out the cell phones from the landlines?
Yeah, I wonder.
I don't even know if they call. Anyway, we look at them. If they go our way, we repeat them. But the one we have today is interesting because I think I learned something from this, that there's more, and it's cross-section of it. Both parties are starting to get disgusted with it. But the poll here, as we were looking at the anti-war report on it, although there's other reports, the majority of American voters want us to call for a permanent Gaza ceasefire. So the majority of American voters, that means a lot of Republicans and a lot of Democrats, a lot of people who just woke up, and decided, hey, there's a limit to this. And one of the big numbers is 61% of all Americans support the idea of the U.S. for calling for a permanent ceasefire.
Yeah.
But believe me, Daniel, there's a lot of stuff that people are lining up. They're already lining up for some of the financing, pump in billions of dollars to rebuild the country they bombed and blew up. So they're getting ready for that. But and the people who are in control, I mean, some of the demands from Israel, they're not very generous in trying to settle a dispute that ends up, if it doesn't end, the killing will continue. So that's what they're dealing with. But anyway, we see a few things in this poll that shows that the American people, at least, are getting disgusted. And as I mentioned in the past, it looks like it might not have taken them as long as it took, in the Korean War and the Vietnam War and the Middle East. Heck, we're still in the Middle East in many ways. So this one is, people are getting tired of it, and they're tired of Ukraine too. And the votes have gone the way of fiscal conservatives and trying to get people back to their senses.
Yeah, this is a poll that the mainstream media doesn't want Americans to see. Certainly the right-wing media doesn't want Americans to see. And put this one up if you can. This is from antiwar.com. Majority of American voters want U.S. to call for permanent Gaza ceasefire. And I think some of the things that are happening, well, first of all, I have to say social media has changed this, specifically Twitter, because since Elon Musk has come in and has opened it up for a real debate, you have a lot of citizen journalists, you have a lot of fact checkers, you have a lot of people like Max Blumenthal, for example, who has really dug into what happened on October 7th and found some interesting things about it. And you're having people who are debunking propaganda in real time. These are significant things. And so while the mainstream media still has a hold on the majority of American people, more and more people are looking for alternatives. They're looking at things that we look at, like Zero Hedge and antiwar.com and others. But they're going on Twitter where, if they're reasonable and not too extreme, they're able to get involved in the conversation and look at things. I'll put that back up because that, I think, is why we're seeing things like this. Polling continues to show the majority of Americans favor a lasting ceasefire for Gaza, a position the Biden administration has rejected. The latest poll from Data for Progress found that 61% of American voters support the idea of the U.S. calling for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and a general de-escalation of violence. Now, this is where Biden is in trouble. It includes 76% of Democrats. And this is surprising because you wouldn't see this. 49% of Republicans. Okay, so it's not a majority of Republicans, but you're factoring all the neocons, all of the uber hawks and this. When you even factor all these people in, you're almost at 50-50 people saying we don't want any part of this. And I think one of the things that is behind this, Dr. Paul, is the realization, and more and more people are seeing this, that this is America's war. We are supplying the bombs, we're supplying the weapons, we're supplying the drones, we're supplying the intelligence, we're supplying the targeting. This is just like Ukraine. This is America's proxy war to a degree. Now, it's not an even fit, but our proxy war in the Middle East. We own this war, and I think a lot of Americans are saying no thanks.
But what our leaders have become dependent on is that this was different because we're going to avoid the body bags. And Vietnam and other things, they would have tried to hide them, which they couldn't get away with. But now they have devised this system where it's our money and all the things that you list, all the responsibility. So we're into this big time, but still the people didn't see body bags, and they're told, well, the American soldiers aren't dying, and even Israelis will say, we don't have to have the American troops. We just want your money and your weapons and take care of it. So that to me means that this is a good news story in the fact that people woke up absence the gory details of what happened in Vietnam, where they started reporting, what was happening. And you point out back then it was the television and things that were coming through, but now we have something faster than the news on television. We have the internet, and that makes a difference. And we get the news. We have I think everybody should recognize you have a bigger job in sorting out what you should believe and what you shouldn't believe, because sometimes the rapidity that we have on the internet will give you a disastrous group of people coming along to believe in, like in COVID. They were successfully in undermining, truth. And but this is good. And I think that the American people, out of their own self-interest, and it has to be out of their own self-interest, that they have to look at this as, what does this mean? What does this mean? And I keep emphasizing the economics, because that's the one that comes home. And if we can, I would just hit that so hard if I'd happen to be into politics, is showing why foreign policy is the bread and butter issue at home. Johnson tried to say, you can have bread and butter. We're so rich, and he didn't get away with it. That gave us the 1970s, and that was a disastrous decade. So we're still trying to do that, except one thing. The financial situation of this country is much worse than it was in the 60s and the 70s, and those were bad decades.
Yeah, I think definitely the financial aspect is important, but I think a lot of Americans are understanding the moral aspect of the whole thing, because here we're having it pounded into our heads. We represent the international rules-based order. We are the ones who are standing up for human rights. Whereas if a hospital, God forbid, gets bombed in Ukraine, basically the whole U.S. government shuts down. But here we have Israel's bombed every hospital in Gaza. They bomb it and then they bomb it again. They bomb the operating room. And I think Americans are starting to realize this, not just the group that they would like, the demonized hard left, what have you, but more and more. And they're also realizing, if you, actually, as the Wall Street Journal pointed out, of all places, just a couple of days ago, the U.S. has provided Israel with 15,000 bombs since October 7th. And I think Americans understand that, any civilian that was killed by Hamas on October 7th is horrible. It's detestable. It shouldn't have happened. But they also understand that, and also we know that this 1,200 they claim is a lot less because of the work of Max Blumenthal. A lot of these people were victims of friendly fire by the Israeli military. Nevertheless, any civilian killed is unacceptable. But when you have this group of several hundred perhaps killed by Hamas, and then you look at Gaza and you see now 16,000 civilians killed, Americans aren't stupid. They have a sense of justice, that there is a moral problem here. Why can't anyone in Congress or the administration say it's unacceptable to murder 16,000 people, even if it's in retaliation for the killing of especially for the killing of only a couple hundred?
There was one part of this report that caught my attention. The Reuters also found that little support for the U.S. arming Israel. Wow, boy, that is something. Just 31% of the respondents said they supported sending Israel with these weapons.
Yeah.
So that is a difference. Most of the time, that's the cop-out. Just send them the weapons, and we won't be as guilty as it would be if we just sent the soldiers. It'd be a little more politically acceptable. But the people are already resisting, because I think they're realizing that there is a distraction. Certainly, they started talking that way over Ukraine.
Yeah.
You know, why are we worrying about the borders and the border fight in Ukraine while we can't even protect our own selves here at home? So this is good, but it's painful and it's very costly. And I think maybe the urgency is the fact that more people are recognizing that. I think the financial people know this, but more average people know it. If you do polling, you find out that people are really scared. And rightfully so. So there's a sentiment in the air that makes this very frightening. And even though somebody showed, but they sort of hide from the reality there because they still love their football games.
Yeah. Well, you're right on Ukraine. I mean, the majority of people oppose sending more money. Congress says, I don't care about you, forget you. But the same thing was also true with COVID. Americans said, we don't want to put these masks on. We don't want to take the shots. And government said, shut up and take the shots or lose your job. So you always say that the people are the leading edge and Congress is the trailing edge.
I want to ask a question here. You know, that more people are against arming Israel. Do you think that could be anti-Semitic?
Well, Congress may pass a bill tomorrow.
We want to talk a little bit about how you define anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I just want to show a couple charts before we move on, if you don't mind, because charts are always fun. If you can put on that next clip. Because here is the poll that we're talking about. Voters support the U.S. calling for a permanent ceasefire and de-escalation. All likely voters, that's where you see that 61. Democrats, that's where you see that 75 or so, 76. Independents, 57% of independents. And the majority of American voters consider themselves independent, support a ceasefire. And 49% of Republicans, as opposed to 41% who oppose. So even the majority of Republicans support a permanent ceasefire. Now, when you look at that under 45 vote, which is important, you have 63% overall support a ceasefire. And now the next one, if we can put that next poll up real quick, this is Americans who believe that military aid should be conditioned on human rights. Now, I know our philosophical position is that there shouldn't be conditions on aid because there shouldn't be aid, but nevertheless, in the world of the reality, interestingly enough, 63% of all American voters believe, hey, if you're going to give them some weapons, you better tell them to stop blowing up people in their homes. You know, we're getting sick of it. And that's 76% of Democrats say that. That's a big problem for Biden because he can't bring himself to say, Bibi, stop killing people. You know, he just can't do it. And the one other thing, I'm just going to reiterate what you say, because a lot of people may poo-poo this poll saying, oh, this looks like this isn't a major outlet. This sounds like a left-wing outlet. But it does dovetail with, if you put that next clip up, as you just suggested, Dr. Paul, it dovetails with a recent Reuters Ipsos poll, which is a mainstream polling outlet, very mainstream. It found that 68% of Americans agree that Israel should call for a ceasefire and try to negotiate. So yes, this other poll may be a left-leaning company. I don't know much about it. Nevertheless, it does dovetail with other polling that we're seeing.
Well, so there's something that should bring it all together, and that is just the right to live freely in a free country and not always be paying for wars and all this thing that goes on. And that I think is starting to show through. They realize that there is a limit to what we have to put up with. So I think some of this stuff is good, and people are realizing it. But the whole thing is understanding how the problem started, what the solution is, where is the pain going to go, because you just can't liquidate these trillions and trillions of dollars. I talk about trillions going up in 1 year. It's not over 3 decades or something, or 100 years before you can get $1 trillion. But now it's just totally exploding, and that's why people are so worried about what's happening.
Yeah, rightly so. Well, the next story is an update, really, because we've talked about it yesterday a little bit. They did a voice vote on this anti-Semitism bill yesterday, and someone raised their hand and called for a recorded vote. So they took the recorded vote. I think it was last night. You needed 2/3 yes for a recorded vote on a suspension bill, which is what this was. And if you put this up, it did pass, which is not a surprise. House passes bill that states anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Now, this is a big deal because it's the first time something like this has passed, as far as I know, in Congress, making this statement that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Now, as we pointed out yesterday, Gerald Nadler, with whom we do not agree very often, is a Jewish member of the House of Representatives. He went to the floor with a very eloquent statement. Whoever wrote this bill knows nothing about Jewish history, because there is a strong history on the left and the right, so to speak, of anti-Zionist Judaism. The people on the right, so-called ultra-Orthodox, don't believe in Zionism because it's a political philosophy that they reject, and there are a lot of secular Jews in the U.S. who are very strongly anti-Zionist. And so essentially what this bill says is, hey, you guys are both anti-Semites, but all of you, millions of you. And Jill Stein, who is the Green Party candidate for president, we know Jill, she's a great anti-war voice. She had a great comment on this vote, if you put up that next clip. Now, she's on the left. She said, Congress says you're a bad Jew if you're not a Zionist. How anti-Semitic is that? Which is pretty hilarious. She's basically calling out Congress saying, hey, you passed a bill about anti-Semitism. It's an anti-Semitic bill in itself, you know.
Right.
It's anti-Jewish.
But you know, this makes me think of, I wonder if we could ever commit anything like this. And I think we do it routinely, because if you, in the old days, a military funding bill, we used to be able to get 15 people to vote with it.
Yeah.
And even then, and as they do now, you don't support the troops. You're anti-patriotic, you're anti-American, and they translate that into, you know, getting the money and all. And this, in a way, is the endorsement of a political idea and which direction Israel should go, and therefore, if you vote one way, they'll say, "Oh, you're anti-Semitic," and they won't give you any credit for using your brain and saying, "Well, you ought to reconsider your position." Is what we should do.
Well, the real deal about this bill, it has nothing to do with Israel. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. What this bill is all about is Congress is panicking because of what we talked about earlier, because they are losing the American people. The American people are unenthused about this war. They need them to be enthused about this war because Ukraine's going to hell in a handbasket, which we'll talk about next. They need to cover the tracks of their last mistake. But Americans aren't buying it. There's a debate in America. There's a debate on Twitter, and it's not just confined to the far left. And so what this bill is about is restricting American speech. It's about intimidating Americans into not going out to protest, not raising their voice and say, hey, yeah, I like Israel. I don't want Jews to get killed. However, look at this slaughter over here on the other side. Don't say that. They want them to shut up because if you speak out, you're anti-Semitic, and no one wants to be tarred with that. It doesn't have the sting that it once had because it's been so overused. Nevertheless, nobody wants to be called names. So this is an attempt by Congress to bully the American people into keeping their mouths shut.
Simply, it's saying that if you express yourself and say that you're against Zionism and some of their policies, you hate all Jews.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's, oh, that's simple for them, you know. They put it together. And for the most part, they get away with it. I'll comment, but I give Jerry Nadler some credit.
Yeah.
Boy, I'll tell you, that is good. So that's what I like to see, this leaking in of the truth, you know. And it's overwhelming, and then they come around it. So that's... people like that should get credit, because maybe next day or next year or after he retires from Congress, he will have, you know, a change in attitude.
Yeah.
And it's better to be late than never on trying to put these principles together. Because right now, the principles or whatever they say, you know, even people believe it is proper to lie, and some people even go to Congress thinking lying is a neat little tool. But I keep thinking, well, there was a bunch of people lying to get into Congress.
Yeah, exactly.
How about presidential debates?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to share this next clip because for a number of reasons. The first one is, now these are the Satmar Jews, and I actually happen to really like them. They come from Hungary. They're called ultra-Orthodox. One of the reasons I like them is because during COVID in New York, the government said, hey, you guys got to shut down, no more religious meetings, none of this business. They said, forget you. Don't you dare stop us. They did it anyway. They don't take no for an answer. They're going to exercise their religious preferences regardless of who says what. Now here they are in New York. This is a gathering of 60,000. Just put it up before you play it. I'm sorry, it's the first video clip. The first video clip. There we go. So just scroll down so I can read the top of it if you don't mind before you start playing. The other way. There you go. So this is over 60,000 anti-Zionist Jews gathered in America for the Satmar Rebbe Yoel Teitelbaum, who opposed the existence of Israel and fought against the ideology of Zionism. Now, you can agree or disagree, but the one thing you can't do, now start showing this clip, these are the Satmar Jews. You cannot call these people anti-Semitic. Take a look at them. I'd love to be at this party. Check it out. Now, the point is, you can agree or disagree with their political perspective. However, this bill that just passed the House blanket called these people a bunch of anti-Semites.
But it makes me, it gives me a memory of what I said on occasion. If you're going to have a revolution, you have to have music. Wasn't that great?
Yeah. That's very jumpy music.
Let them sing. But you know, there were other groups that stood up. I mean, like the Jews in this case stood up, but the Amish stood up. They said they didn't send in the troops into an Amish community because it was overwhelming. And what about the parents that finally stood up?
Yeah.
They actually were more harsh with parents because one of their dedications, and I remember being taught as a little child that they wanted control of children at least before they're 6, and then we can control them forever, and that's what they do. They want to have controls, and but when the parents stood up to the harsh regulations of COVID, that made the government nervous. And they're still doing it, though. I mean, when you think about this, who owns the kids or who's responsible for the kids, most people believe it's the government. Parents aren't capable of doing that. Well, I hope they have a thing coming for to exploit into them one day.
Well, our last little clip for the piece for the day is also a follow-up in a way. It's a follow-up to our top story yesterday. We're talking about how the American mainstream media has now finally started talking about Ukraine being a disaster and Ukraine being lost. Well, this is a big deal because the Welt is the #1 paper in Germany. Germany has been an enthusiastic hostage or supporter of this U.S. proxy war against Russia. And Die Welt has been a devoted proponent of the war against Russia through Ukraine. They have been all on board. And as I'll say, they still are. Nevertheless, we noticed this on Zero Hedge. There's a big turning if you put that next clip up, because Die Welt. Has Kiev already lost? Germany's Welt newspaper claims Ukraine is crumbling and that Orban was right, but nobody dares admit it. This is a big deal. If you do the next one, this is going to shock a lot of Germans. But entitled Has Kiev Already Lost?, the article describes Ukraine's military growing increasingly despondent to the point that the country's commander-in-chief admits there's a stalemate. From the article, winter's just around the corner. The counteroffensive seems to have failed. The Allies are weary. And since the beginning of November, or at the latest, Ukrainian President Zelensky has a new opponent who was not necessarily to be expected: his own commander-in-chief. This is a big deal.
I imagine one friend of ours is probably not surprised about this. I think he's a colonel, a McGregor.
Yeah, from the beginning. From the
very beginning. He's become a loyal, steady supporter and a spokesman, for us. He's been to a couple of our conferences.
At 3 of our conferences.
And we depend on him for the research. And I keep thinking, I guess one of the things that if you go back and you want to give Biden, let's say you're a Democrat, and you want to give Biden some real good advice so he doesn't get into trouble, you could say, well, why don't we look at your plan? Do I understand you have a plan for maybe getting out of Afghanistan? Getting out of wars is always messy, but maybe we need some advice. And I think he had some suggestions for that never got much credibility.
Yeah. Well, he was considered a kook and this and that. They couldn't call him a non-patriot because he actually was in a tank fighting. and was a decorated combat veteran. But nevertheless, it wasn't just McGregor. McGregor's great, but it was people who've also spoken at our conferences. Scott Ritter, Larry Johnson, and many others who were right from the beginning. Judge Napolitano has a great show. He interviews these people every day. He has kept an open mind, and he's a great conduit for truth on this as well. So these things were available beforehand. Nobody wanted to listen. And now, just like with you, when you voted against the Iraq War and everything went to hell, and everyone finally agreed to it, they said, well, nobody saw this coming, right? And you're over there saying, hold on.
And it'll be stashed away in some file someplace. Or maybe down the road, 50, 100 years, somebody will say, hey, I wonder what the history of all this is about.
Yeah.
But we tried our best to change things immediately, but also to leave a record, of what could be and should have been done. And it wasn't what got to make people, well, how did you know this and this? I said, well, it is really not complicated. Violence is not good. The Constitution gives us good guidelines, and if we act in a moral sense, we don't dig these holes. When you think about it, just really depresses me when you think about, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the war has ended. But the war was really only starting. That's when our empire was really got a boost. It might have been an infant, but it became a teenager, and then we've been working on the empire, and it's ongoing. And we still People don't want to give up with that. Even though we see these and we report it, when people are changing their minds, there's still a lot of people, at least the ones that the mainstream media, they get military people to defend their position and look down upon people like us that would suggest another way of doing it.
Yeah. Well, on Ukraine, we can't let it go that Thomas Massey was on Tucker Carlson last night, and Massey, as to be expected, was spectacular. He handled every question perfectly, super well informed, unlike most members of Congress, super well informed, super knowledgeable, and it was hard. I was actually about ready to go to sleep, and I saw it and I watched it on my phone, which I don't usually do, but I couldn't turn it off. So we had a hard time. I found a 1 minute and 15-second clip of Congressman Massey on with Tucker, and he talks about Ukraine here. And let's watch this exchange as we kind of close out, lean toward the edge of today's show. This is such a great exchange. Let's listen to this.
We've spent twice as much in Ukraine as we do on all of our roads and bridges federally in the United States. That is money that could have gone to double our infrastructure. Yet we're blowing up infrastructure that we're going to end up, I hate this, but they're going to tell us that we have to rebuild it when this is all over with.
The scale of this insanity is hard to digest, and they're saying we have a moral obligation. You're a bad person. You just heard the National Security Advisor say that you're a bad person if you're against this. But no one ever mentions that we have abetted the killing of an entire generation of Ukrainian men that will not be replaced to fight a war that they cannot win. They literally cannot win. We prevented a peace deal, and we extended the war, and we killed all these people. And so all the ones running around with their little Ukraine flag pins, they're implicated in that. Has anyone apologized?
No, to support this money, you have to be economically illiterate and morally deficient. Those are both conditions of voting for this. Because to say that we're going to grind down Russia, that we're going to deplete their own soldiers by expending the lives of Ukrainians, knowing that in the end, we're going to leave them holding the bag, that in the end, they can never prevail. They're not going to take back Crimea, even though
I could sit and watch this for a long time. But he makes a couple of great points. One of them is familiar. We blow up their stuff, then we have to pay to fix it.
They're already lining up.
And the other, which is interesting, is the money we sent over the last year is more than we spend on the entire roads and bridges in the U.S.
Yeah, they're all falling down.
Yeah.
We didn't even have to bomb them. They're just worn out.
Yeah, exactly. So hats off to Thomas Massey.
So sad.
Yeah.
You know, it's not brand new. It's not like we didn't have some experiences in this country to know what's happening. But the wars are generally like this.
Yeah.
The waste and the killing going on, and yet this really sad part is I think the people who orchestrate these wars, number-wise, they're the ones who are in a very strong minority. Then they have control of the propaganda machine, the political machine, the judicial system, and now it's the attack on freedom of speech and expressing ourselves, and yet we still, and I am determined to look at the positive side to get people to say, you can't throw in the towel. What would life be like if you say, it's all over, and just sit around and wait for them to engulf all of us? So, and I think, and the other thing that I do, Daniel, and you're aware of, is I like to get, and we experience all the time, because I want to associate with people that are like-minded. Not that they're robots and we just agree on everything, but like-minded in the sense that there's a better way to go and discuss it and work out the details and try to figure out why. I've always wanted to know, why are they doing it? What's their motivation? And getting together with people like that, which we have done on numerous occasions in just our short history, I find them very enlightening, and I'm delighted with that, because people are interested in it, and people will come long distances just to know that they're going to be meeting other people, and long-term friendships are oftentimes made at these conferences. So I think that that is what we should concentrate on and use the facilities. And I keep thinking, well, how did the founders do this? How did the people who were rebelling against the biggest army in the history of the world, the British Empire? Maybe it was, maybe they were able to persuade them and scare them, but they did it with pamphleteering. And they probably didn't have that great of cameras. They didn't have cameras to show 50,000 people gathering together. But the message, the ideas, the ideologies, and the principles that they were fighting for led to the revolution and the Constitution. So, and that was occurring under dire circumstances, and it's pretty amazing that it worked. And I think that we need confidence that ideas are important. It's the correctness of the idea which will determine the direction of our country. And I think that's what our goals here are at the Institute for Peace and Prosperity, is get to the right ideas of what liberty is all about, emphasize that, and show people that if you care about peace and prosperity, that's the way to go. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.